The three angels' messages, if this doesn't get your attention, if this doesn't get you to make a decision, well, there's nothing more. There's nothing more. Ellen White says concerning Jesus when he was here, I didn't bring the statement with me, but she says concerning the Jews, that it would have been a rejoicing to Christ, rejoicing to all of heaven, to save them. But she said, Jesus had exhausted the last arrow in his quiver. There wasn't any more means God had to win them, so they were lost. Now, my friends, the three angels' messages are like the last three arrows that God has in his quiver. And if this doesn't save you, if this doesn't result in your salvation, there isn't anything left. And so the third angel's message is one of the most serious, solemn subjects that any preacher, teacher, or congregation can study. It says here that we are not to do three things. Notice verse 9. The first thing that we are not to do is we're not to worship the beast. Because if you worship the beast, according to verse 11, you're going to receive the wrath of God. You're not to worship the beast. That's the Antichrist. That's number one. The second thing that we are told that we are not to do is we are not to worship the image of the beast. That's in verse 9. And again, in verse 11, if you worship his image, you're going to suffer the wrath of God. And the third thing that we are told not to do is we are not to receive the mark of the beast, the mark of Antichrist, on our forehead or on our hand. If we do that, then we're also going to receive the wrath of God, as you see in verses 10 and 11. The original lie was the idea that you can sin, you can disobey God and still live.
Oh, I see.
Isn't that what the devil told Eve?
Yes.
Eve said, the Lord told us that if we eat of this fruit, we'll die. The devil said, no, you won't. You can eat of it, you won't die. In other words, you can sin and not die. That is the lie. That is the lie that is even believed today by many Seventh-day Adventists, I'm sorry to say. It's the idea that you can go on and sin. We have people teaching in our colleges that say, you're going to sin until the second coming. Well, yes, people are going to sin until the second coming, but then they're going to be destroyed.
I see.
People are not going to sin until the second coming and then go to heaven. That's the lie. The idea, you can keep on sinning, just keep your sins confessed. Then you go to heaven. That's what the Roman Catholics believe. In the book of Luke in chapter 22, if you read verses 35 to 38, notice what Jesus says here. He said to them, when I sent you without money, bag, sack, and sandals, did you lack anything? So they said nothing. Then he said to them, but now he who has a money bag, let him take it, and likewise a sack, and he who has no sword, let him sell his garment and buy one. For I say to you that this which is written must still be accomplished in me, and he was numbered with the transgressors. For the things concerning me have an end. Then they said, Lord, look, here are 2 swords. And he said to them, it is enough. Now the papists said, look, Jesus didn't say it was too much. He said it is enough. And they said, there are 2 swords. One is the spiritual sword. That's what we have. The sword of the Spirit. That's a spiritual sword. The other sword is the temporal sword. And Jesus did not say that it was too much to have 2 swords. He just said it is enough. And so, the papacy is built on the idea that the church, which wields the spiritual sword, should control the state, who wields the temporal sword. And that was the teaching through all their writings throughout the Dark Ages. They used this text to prove it. The two swords. And they said there's a spiritual sword, there's a temporal sword. But the church, which holds the spiritual sword, should control the state, which owns the temporal sword. So now, he's telling the people to make an image to the beast. And then not only that, it says in verse 15, he was granted power to give breath to the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause as many as would not worship the image of the beast to be killed. You know, back in Daniel's day, there was a great image that was built in Babel, which is a type of this. And when those three Hebrew worthies were walking the streets of Babylon, they saw that image being built. It took some time to build it. They saw the feet being built, and then the legs, and then the waist, and then the belly, and then the chest, and then the shoulders, and the arms, and the neck, and then the head, and finally the image was completely done. Everything had been all right while that image of the beast was going up until it was all done. And when it was all done, you either had to worship it or get killed. Do you realize that that very same thing is happening right now? And people that don't recognize what's going on, it's just the same as when they were walking through the streets of Babylon then, and they saw this image going up, and everything was all right. But once that image was completed, if you didn't worship it, then you were killed. This is a great controversy, page 445. What was the genius of the beast power? It was a church united with a state that controlled all states in Europe. So what would the image of the beast be? It would be when the churches control the state and influence the state to do what they want done. And remember, if you worship the image of the beast, what's going to happen to you?
You're lost.
You're going to be lost. When an image of the beast is built, when an image of the beast is built, if you obey that image, remember, whoever you obey, you're that person's servants. Whoever you obey, you're that person's servants. We're coming right now in a few minutes to some very hard things. I hope you listen carefully. You can go study it for yourself. Some of you aren't going to believe this when I tell you. You can go and study for yourself. I'll read it first from Great Controversy, page 445. When the leading churches of the United States, uniting upon such points of doctrine as are held by them in common, shall influence the state to enforce their decrees and to sustain their institutions, then Protestant America will have formed an image of the Roman hierarchy, and the infliction of civil penalties upon dissenters will inevitably result. What is the image of the beast? It's when the churches influence the state to enforce their decrees, to enforce their will on people. Now, friends, the bad news is that right now, the Seventh-day Adventist Church is building an image to the beast. Amen. That's the bad news, but it's the truth. We've always looked and we've always been told, and I've been told all my life, that this will be the Baptist Church and the Methodist Church and the Christian Church and the Churches of Christ, and there'll be all of those, that they'll do it. We won't do it. We're doing it. Do you understand from what we've studied, do you understand what an image of the beast is?
Yes.
An image of the beast is when a church influences the state to do what they wanted to have done.
Yes.
And they enforce their will by means of the state. That is the way, friends, that Jesus was crucified.
Yes.
And the third way, and this has been the most popular way for the Seventh-day Adventist Church, the third way that a church influences the state to do what they want to do is through the courts. Because the courts of the state enforce the laws that the legislature made. The courts enforce the laws. Those are the three ways. Influence the president or the king, influence the legislature, the people that make the laws, or influence the courts that enforce the laws. And at Seventh-day Adventist Church, we've been going to court to get our way, to force people to do what we want them to do for over 25 years.
My Lord, help us, Jesus.
That is building an image to the beast.
Yes, Lord.
If you worship that, you will end up in hellfire. That's what the Bible says. That's what the third angel's message said. That's the third angel's message is not any more popular today than it ever has been. Not even in Adventism.
I see.
You don't have to worship on. We say, oh, don't worship on Sunday. You receive the mark. You don't have to worship on Sunday to receive the threatening and the third angel's message. All you have to do is worship the image of the beast. You don't have to worship the beast. You don't have to become a Roman Catholic. You don't have to worship the Pope. You don't have to. All you have to do is you don't have to worship on Sunday. Just worship the image.
Mercy.
Read Revelation 14:9-11. If you worship the image, you're going to have the same thing happen to you as if you worship the beast or receive the mark. The same thing. You know how bad this is? A few weeks ago, in Loma Linda, California, a man that calls himself a Creation Seventh-day Adventist was arrested and put in jail. He's in jail right now.
Yes, Lord.
Has he committed a crime? He's called himself a Seventh-day Adventist. That's the crime he's committed. And he's not a part of their organization. He calls himself a Seventh-day Adventist. And a few days ago, his associate, who had a news conference in Loma Linda and explained their situation, then he was arrested and he's put in jail. Now both of them in jail in California right now.
Help us, Jesus.
We have built an image to the beast.
Mercy, Lord.
The thicket was composed of wild plum trees and crabapple trees. And there had just been a severe windstorm. It was late spring, early summertime. And this windstorm had been so severe that there were two baby birds that had been blown out of their nest, and they were sitting by the side of the road, and they were too young to fly, and they were making quite a racket. And their mother was frantic, and she did not have any way to get these little baby birds of hers back in the nest, and she was fluttering around and just frantic around these two baby birds. And the two men in front on horseback, they passed by. A little while later, two more men, horseback, passed by. Remember, there were 6 men traveling together. And then there were, in the rear, there were 2 more men. And one of these men, he saw one of the men in the rear stopped. Now this man riding a horse in the rear, traveling with the 6 men, one of the 6 men. The one in the rear that stopped, his name was Abraham Lincoln. And he stopped his horse. He got off his horse. He led his horse to the side of the road. He tied his horse up, and then he went to the baby birds, and because they couldn't fly, he was able to catch them. Even though they were afraid, he was able to catch them. Abraham Lincoln was 6 foot 4 inches tall. He had great big hands. And he had both baby birds in one hand, and with the other hand, he started to look where the nest was. Well, his companion rode on. Now, as this group of men rode down the road, eventually they came to a creek. And when they came to the creek, they stopped and they allowed their horses to take a drink in the creek. First two stopped. They waited a little while. The next two were there. They stopped and let their horses drink. They were visiting. And in a moment, they saw just one person come. And they said, "Where's Lincoln?" And he said, "Well, the last I saw him, he's by the side of the road with a couple baby birds in his hand looking for their nest." And they laughed. Well, Abraham Lincoln kept looking until he found their nest. And he placed those two baby birds back in their nest. And then, since the baby birds were safe in their nest, he went back. He untied his horse, got back on his horse, and he rode on his way and joined the rest of them. However, it had taken him so long to rescue these baby birds and get them back in the nest, to find the nest and get them back in the nest, that by the time he caught up with him down at the creek, he was about an hour late. And they knew why he was so late. Because his companion had told him. Last he saw him, he was there by the side of the road with the two baby birds in his hand looking for their nest. And they thought that was funny. A lawyer, a successful lawyer, would spend an hour getting two baby birds back in their nest. And they began to laugh at him. And Joshua Fry Speed, who was one of the ones in front, said, when we began to laugh at him, this is what he said with great emphasis. Now, I can't imitate what he said because Abraham Lincoln had a high tenor voice, and I don't have a high tenor voice, so there's no way I can tell you the way he could tell you. But I can tell you the words that he said, because Joshua Fry Speed told us what he said. And this is what Abraham Lincoln said when they were laughing at him. Quote, "Gentlemen, you may laugh, but I could not sleep well tonight if I had not saved those birds. Their cries would have rung in my ears." Upon the people of God, we're like the men on the horseback who are just riding by. They don't even know anything's wrong. And then we talk about going to the kingdom of heaven. Are we deluded or not? A few weeks ago, I was where your pastor is right now, down in Colton, California. Find out, just a few days before, a Seventh-day Adventist was arrested right at Loma Linda and put in prison. Now one of his associates has been arrested and put in prison. Two of them in prison. The people that had sued them and got them arrested are the Seventh-day Adventist Church, General Conference. His nickname, I don't know his real name, his nickname is Chick McGill. I have met him and talked with him on more than one occasion. He says in verse 29, "Who is weak, and I am not weak? Who is made to stumble, and I do not burn with indignation?" The Apostle Paul had empathy and sympathy for other people who were in trouble. And he did something about it. Look at Hebrews 13. Hebrews 13, verse 3.
it says, remember the prisoners as if chained with them, and those who are mistreated, since you yourselves are in the body also. Now, when I talk to people about this, I get a whole litany of excuses. People say to me, well, he was convicted by the court. Yes. Friends, the people that were burned at the stake in the Middle Ages were all convicted and found guilty in court. They didn't take people out and just kill them. They took them to court. And when they were convicted and they were pronounced guilty, then they burned them at the stake. All of those people were convicted in court. Somebody says, well, he's a fanatic. Listen, study the history of the martyrs. The people that were burned at the stake were all called fanatics. And every other kind of epithet that they could imagine. Well, somebody says, he's a heretic. The people that were burned at the stake were all called heretics. And many of them you would call heretics too, not just the Catholics. Many of those people you would call heretics too, because they didn't understand religion exactly the way you do. And then here's the most common one of all. We have to protect our church. We have to protect our church name. Well, listen, friends, study history. That is the primary reason that all the heretics were put in prison and burned at the stake. That is the primary reason. Get the book, The Reformers and Their Stepchildren. Read the first chapter about the Donatist controversy, and you'll read that clear back in the 4th century, the Catholic Church got the Roman government to make a law that if you were not a Catholic, you could not call yourself a Christian. That was a Roman law back in the 4th century. You could not call yourself the real Christians could not call themselves a Christian without being in trouble with the government. This controversy over whether you can call yourself a Seventh-day Adventist or a Christian or whatever, this is nothing new. This has been going on for 1,700 years in the Christian church. We have to protect the church. Why did they burn and kill millions of people? Because the Pope said, they're deceiving the sheep of the true flock. If we let them go on, they will deceive the sheep of the true flock. Let me just come right to the point. What is being done right now, and what has been done for the last 30 years or more by the Seventh-day Adventist denomination is not at all different in principle from what the so-called Christian clergy did for 1,200 years during the Dark Ages. There is not one speck of difference in principle. Somebody might say, well, they're not killing them. Oh, yes, they are. We're not going there. If you can't get it figured out without me telling you stories about people martyred, you're too dense to get the point. We're not going there. I don't need to go there. They're putting them in prison. They're in prison right now. By the way, they didn't kill him first either. And White's very clear about that. They didn't kill him first. They didn't kill him right away. They first put him in prison and tried to solve the problem that way. And if they just couldn't get them to recant any other way, well, then that was just the last resort. And yet, the people I meet, they think that those church dignitaries that did those things in the Dark Ages will be in hellfire. And we're doing the very same thing, and we think we're going to be in heaven. Now, what is it? Are we deluded or not? And people think, well, that's no problem of mine. And I meet people and I say, well, wait a minute. You're supporting this with your money. You're part of it. Oh, no, I'm going to a church that's not. Yes, you are. You don't need to talk to me about that. I've worked in the conference. I know where the tithe goes, and I know what supports what. I know how it's directed. I talked to the conference treasurer in the Texas conference when I was there. 20% of your tithe goes direct to the general conference, and we have letters from the general conference. They use that money to sue people and put them in prison. You're part of it, if you're supporting it. with your time, money, and influence. We think that we're going to be in the New Jerusalem, and the others that did the same thing back in the past, that they're going to be on the outside. What a delusion. Here's what Ellen White said in 1890. We want to understand the time in which we live. We do not half understand it. We do not half take it in. My heart trembles in me when I think of what a foe we have to meet and how poorly we are prepared to meet him. The trials of the children of Israel and their attitude just before the first coming of Christ have been presented before me again and again to illustrate the position of the people of God in their experience before the second coming of Christ. How the enemy sought every occasion to take control of the minds of the Jews, and today he is seeking to blind the minds of God's servants that they may not be able to discern the precious truth. And I want to tell you, the devil was so successful that almost the entire nation of the Jews were destroyed. At the first advent, almost all of God's chosen people, almost all of God's special people, God's church, almost all of them were destroyed at the first advent. We're getting ready right now to see the same thing happen on a much larger scale all over the world in the second advent. No one will be taken to heaven who has a heart of stone. People will not be taken to heaven who take their brothers and sisters to court. I'm running out of time. I won't read it to you. Read it in your own Bible. 1 Corinthians 6, verses 1 to 10. Read all 10 verses. Look at the context. The people that do that will not be in the kingdom of heaven. That's what Paul says. That's just the Bible. That's not me. And this is a little morning watch book that is one of my favorites, called This Day with God. I want to read to you one sentence from this book on page 32. I won't tell you who it's written to. You'll think I'm trying to point fingers at somebody. Have a look at your own book. She says, God requires moral perfection in all. Friend, before you or I ever again tell anybody that we expect to be in heaven, we need to meditate on and maybe even pray over the birds by the side of the road and blown out of the nest and are helpless, and ask yourself the question, will I be recognized as a Christian, as a one who has a Christ-like character? Am I really a Christian or not? My dear friends, there will be nobody in the kingdom of heaven with a heart of stone. There will be nobody in the kingdom of heaven that has not learned how to show mercy to people that are depraved and guilty and don't even know their condition. And my dear friend, these people are all around us. They're around us in the church. And they're even more around us in the world. And the angels of heaven are down here. But they're keeping a record of your life and my life. And the angels know that judgment will be without mercy to the one that has shown no mercy. Oh, friend, I don't know how to tell you. But won't you go home and pray about it? Say, Lord, I want to be wicked. I want to have a heart like Jesus had. Ellen White says that Jesus did not disdain when he was a boy and a young person to rescue a wounded bird. He that is faithful in that which is least is faithful also in much. Do you want to be in the kingdom of heaven? The only people, friend, that will be in the kingdom of heaven are the people that have learned the lesson of mercy. Because only the merciful will obtain